Hey everyone, this is Taka. I've never really done one of these video dumps before, but I was feeling inspired by Frito's video after World Cup this year. There will be a text version of this dump for anyone who just wants to go through, grab teams, or just read anything, but it's basically just going to be the script for this video, so expect a bunch of blobs of paragraphs. I was in charge of the Uber slot for Studio Gibbles during this SCL. I personally played week 5 through semis, while Fade played week 1 through 4. Overall, we went a combined 8-2. I went 5-1 and Fade went 3-1. And this video, I'm just aiming to go over my prep process, the teams I made, including like some sets, some EVs, and just the games I played. And first and foremost, I want to give a huge shout out to Skyu, Owen, Richard, Lana, and Jojen for supporting me all tour. I know I pestered you guys all asking for like 500 games, but genuinely without any of this help I would not have been able to get this record. And just on the teams, in general, I think this tier is really offensive and prep oriented. A lot of the teams you're going to see me talk about are built to take advantage of my opponent's tendencies with some counterplay for other structures. Obviously, you're going to see Koridon on everything. It's required on any like non-stall or non-trick room teams, so there's no reason not to use it. But yeah, let's get right into it. I was against FC. To be honest, since it was the first week, I wasn't planning on being as prep heavy, and FC is generally a pretty versatile player. I wanted to cover bulky offense, balance, King Gambit, and some sort of ho-ho structures. In general, I built quite a few different teams, but since both Fade and I prefer offense, I ended up settling on this HO-esque trade-heavy setup structure with like 5 setup mons and Lando. So most of these sets themselves are pretty normal. You have like the fast Taunt Pharisees, standard Fire King Gambit, a defensive Lando, a normal Terrifier Koridon. But then you have the 2 different sets. Well, I guess they're not so different, but minor tweaks to standard sets for this matchup. We have the Colbert Brick NDM. It acts as additional insurance into Air Balloon King Gambit, while also kind of shoring up that matchup versus Crunch Station, which can be annoying if you're solely relying on Lando, who has to be thrown at like Koridon and King Gambit and pretty much every physical attacker at some point. Lunala has both Calm Mind and Meteor Beam, which is a little bit different than usual, as generally on like an HO structure, you'd guess he'd be just Beam Lunala and you'd be hesitant to go ho on it. Clicking Calm Mind is a green flag for your opponent to hard ho and just like Sacred into Whirlwind it out, which lets Lunala act as a nice lure. You still get some immediate power because you have double boosting move. With Terra Ghost, you can brute force things like Koridon, Eternatus, some defensive arcs, and you need focus obviously for King Gambit and Tinglu, which otherwise kind of tear up a Necrozma team. So as I said before, I won't be heavily discussing the games that I personally didn't play, but for this game we did get pretty fortunate. We got into a Calm Mind war between our Lunala and FC's Water Seus. We crit the Water Seus, and at that point, since they had no water, our Necrozma or Koridon kind of got out of hand. Wasn't too ridiculous to just brute force through their defensive tools that were remaining after that and clean up this game. I think the matchup was in FC's favor, especially since our tech didn't hit, but I think this was a winnable game. We have the tools, it just requires smart use of our Life Orb Koridon. But yeah, overall I'm not super satisfied with the prep for this week. I think our team was a bit shaky into these balance structures. It was kind of fishing the offense matchup, which wasn't intentional. I think just inherently by the way I build, I end up fishing offense a bit rather than heavily prepping for these more defensive structures. but it's something I try to account for much more heavily throughout the rest of the tour. Week 2, we were playing True Nora. I think for True Nora, our prep process was a bit similar to last week. We weren't planning to be as prep heavy, there wasn't as much in the scout. In general, I think I kind of underrate Tinglu. This mod is a huge pain for a lot of different teams, especially my style of team, which is heavily bootsless. I use a lot of ghosts. I generally don't run a ton of locate Koraidon. Obviously, they're all good. I just have different preferences. But I was generally thinking we'd expect some sort of water CS type team. I kind of mass built for this week and just had Fade pick a team that has good vibes. I think we initially settled down to like some either fat spike shit like Groudon, Ho-Oh, Kyogre, Eternatus, or a sort of offense that's like Calm Mind, Arc Electric with Zacian. At some point during the team's process, the lack of a real fighting resist and over-reliance on Lando T in test games made some of these teams feel kind of shaky. So we ended up swapping out Alexius for Gosius. In general, I kind of cheated defensive counterplay on this bulky offense team with some general techs and terras that would help us match up into offenses. Bulkless Kyogre is a little bit weird, like especially on a team like this, but with Eternatus and Steel Koraidon plus Taunt Gosius, our matchup into a lot of Koraidons and other Kyogres felt okay. But I'm pretty sure this was a mistake, because originally I had an Electric Arc over Gosius, right? And Alexius acts as that Kyogre counterplay. So we didn't load into a Kyogre, but regardless, I don't think this is a team that should be used for other games. Besides that, I had Gosius just EV to outspeed Modest Arcs, rest in bulk, still a taunt, gives you some counterplay versus cheese like Calyrex, TR NDM, King Gambit, Steel Koraidon and Steel Zacian was a strong offensive core that acted as like a form of cheese. And I feel like since this team doesn't have real speed control, having these defensive terras, I guess, that could just brute force through setup mons and like soft check things like ID Calm Mind, NDM, Fairy CS, etc. I thought having these two steel terras would be quite useful. Red card on Etern is a little bit weird, so I guess we'll see down. It's just a standard defensive Eternatus with a lot of speed, and red card. Honestly, red card isn't like that insane. However, the tech that we wanted it for here was specifically Ground CS. I think we found Ice Beam, Dragon Dance, Ground CS to be quite annoying, especially since we had so much Lando usage at this point. I thought having some nice sequences versus like weird setup could be cool, and like I trusted Fade to make some plays where you'd like go Eternatus on like an Ice Beam click from Ground CS or on a Zacian close combat, or like pivoting in on Koraidon's Flare Blitz, and that would give us like a lot of momentum in the offense mirror. So all this said about loading into offense, which is what I was expecting from Nora, like some water CS offense, we ended up into this weird ass Tinglu, Terapagos, Wisp, Electric Arc team. This matchup was honestly just pretty dire. Tinglu was a huge pain for this. I kind of ignored, not fully ignored it, but it definitely wasn't a super chill matchup. We had to make a lot of different plays, and the game was generally pretty uphill regardless. We did get called out hard in matchup, but I think the main turn that probably ended the game flat out was turn 8 here. We miss a scale shot onto Ho-Oh here. It's not like a guaranteed kill or anything, but it is basically 50% chance to kill here. If we get that kill, Ho-Oh is gone. Gosius, Etern, Zacian are all opened up. We get basically no ground immune, and Lando can kind of pivot around, soft check some shit. put more pressure on Terapagos, which will open up Gosius. So, not like the game was won or anything after that, but I think it would have massively at least helped, especially considering this is a Scarf Koraidon and a non-Calm-Mind Arceus, so we should in theory have some way to win with Gosius. Granted, it's still uphill versus Dinglu, so it happens. I think out of all the teams we loaded this tour, this one is definitely the weakest. I'm not a huge fan of the speed control here. The defensive tools are kind of hit or miss, and techs like Red Card E-Turn and like super fast Kyogre are not really as reusable into a wide array of matchups. So yeah, this is one of our 2 losses, but I can personally take most of the blame as it was lost mainly on prep. Okay, moving on to week 3 versus Frito. So I had a better idea of how to prep for Frito than I did for Nora or FC. Obviously I wanted to offense because it's fucking broken, but after seeing her World Cup teams, some of her structures in UPL, I noticed some patterns, like a lack of defensive returns, reliance on running offenses that kind of pivoted around resists for Koraidon or like Terad, rather than hard stops with mons like Ferocious plus Fat Ogre. My main 2 thoughts here were to either bring a team with a fast enough pace to ignore hazards and break first, or bring some like mono boots and play the Groudon, Tinglu, Boots Koraidon kind of structure. I'm an offense junkie, so the 2 mons that popped up in mind were Banded Koraidon and Scarf Kyogre. Scarf Kyogre is honestly kind of a shitter, but it has its matchups, especially into people who don't load a ton of bulky Kyogre or Eternatus. I noticed both her Eternatus and Kyogres were generally less HP invested. Band Koraidon also brute forces through a lot of these like tough matchups with, broken, terra-fighting close combat, you 2-shot, Ho-Oh, etc. Generally though, Frito uses a lot of ghost types, so it kind of sucks to lock into CC versus these teams. But something I did notice is Banded Crunch. Banded Crunch has good odds to one-shot Lunala through Shadow Shield, which is huge. So versus lead Lunalas, or even just revenging like a Calm Mind or unagility like Lunala, you can just leverage Koraidon to immediately eliminate it. This is an entirely huge calc, and it made this team go from like unplayable into ghost types into like actually pretty decent, I'd say, especially in conjunction with Terradark Pecha and mixed defense Eternatus. So generally with mons like Band Koraidon and Scarf Kyogre, you need a ton of pivoting. After Miraidon got banned, there are really only a few pivot mons. That includes Koraidon itself, Lando, Gliscor, and Pecharunt. Pecha is a mon that I did pick up from seeing Frito and Kate use it in previous tours, and it patches the E-Killer matchup for this team. I don't necessarily have to click Terra Ghosts or anything, and it still gives me a T-Spikes out that wasn't so reliant on Terra. Initially though, this team did not have Eternatus, which is why it was leveraging Pecharunt so much, but even with Pecha covering, or even with E-Turn covering the T-Spikes issue, I still found Pecha being quite useful into just a variety of physical attackers, so I wasn't overly reliant on Fairy, Orlando, or even Koraidon HP itself. And I rounded out this team with my favorite defensive core, Fairy, Lando, Kyogre, which I have been using for like 3 years now. Pretty much all of SV since Kyogre came back. It is literally insane into any structure that isn't Life Orb Eternatus, and even then you can optimize it to win. Fat Calm Mind Roar Fairy is like a nice win con for this. I mean, it's really the only win con, but you throw it on this team to help cheat some setup matchups, since fully invested Ferocious can eat pretty much any hit. I could not tell you what this Eternatus' spread does. It's faster than Modest Arceus, the bulk is just bulky, I guess. It did help versus like Psyshock Lunala, versus like Koraidon, Zacian, NDM, Calyrex, etc. It's just like a decent neutral bulk Trademon. And honestly, I don't think I've ever seen Ban Koraidon have such a nice matchup. So obviously I didn't play this one again, but Ban Koraidon went stupid, where we get some turns where Eternatus trades, we get Koraidon in, 55 to Ho-Oh, forcing them to switch out her Terra here, both of which would be pretty okay for this team with an Eternatus. As the game goes on, we leverage bulky Fizdef Eternatus to get a free Toxic on Groudon. She greets a bit, D-Max just kills Groudon flat out, and we're in great position. Eventually we get Koraidon in, click CC into Ho, and then you see the Koraidon special, Terrified CC kills. And at this point, with Ho gone, we can keep throwing out strong Koraidon attacks, using Roar Fairy to beat these weird setup, not really weird, but just setup matchups that can get hard, like Electric Arc. And so this game just flows on, we play it well, and Ban Koraidon, bulky turn, just clean up. I am a fan of this team. It pivots really well as you can do in Obos. Ban Koraidon is hard to make work, and I'm glad I was able to actually get it to work successfully. Scarf Kyogre does suck. I'm not taking away from that. But into this scout, it felt nice, and I'm glad we had a successful game and teammate with it. 4 versus Emozu 9. It's going to be kind of hard for me to describe this week's prep process. When I prep, I kind of just ramble to myself and in like a chat for like hours, and then schizo build like 15 to 20 teams and test them. I think the main idea we had this week was exploiting the lack of ghost resists. His teams were reliant on like Terradark, Ho-Oh to mainly deal with them, usually ours, but Def too. So I figured some sort of like offensive Ghostius or like boosted Lunala would blow through his shit. We did have 100% Ho or Lando usage at this point, so I was fully set on avoiding that mon this week, which essentially requires Ho-Oh or like Ho, in my opinion. Ho-Oh is really nice to have on a team, but it's not like a hard answer to anything. It just like soft checks the entire tier. So it doesn't really fulfill my own personal builder checklists a lot of the time. Grass Ho-Oh is like another thing entirely. This mon soft checks Kyogre, Groundseuss, Lunala, Zacian, Arceus, Steel Koraidon, etc. It just patches up every matchup if you click Terra, and has so much flexibility with Terra too. Zacian was standard SD Steel, with Trail to act as like pseudo speed control on the 6, helps a little bit with webs, in conjunction with like Ho-Oh of course, and Lunala, Arceus, plus D-Spikes. Koraidon here was standard Terra Steel, because I generally require a team to have a real steel, like a real steel resist that isn't Zacian. And I think Koraidon usually should be Terra Steel on a team if you don't have like a King Gambit or an NDM or some like Dark Terra somewhere, because it helps versus both like Iron Defense, Calm Mind, NDM, and like opposing Taunt or sub Terra Steel Koraidon. Other than those guys, this team had some like weird EVing in sets, so I will go through them now. The first thing you notice is Life Orb Eternatus. It is common to see Life Orb, but ours was slightly different. Fade recommended this, but it's Life Orb Draco Meteor, T-Spikes, no recover. It's a guaranteed OHKO on opposing Eternatus. It's generally a nice trade mod because Draco has good odds to OHKO other Eternatus, trades well into Groudon. Life Orb still lets you trade well into NDM, defensive Arceus. And T-Spikes usually just perform really well on these kind of teams, especially versus the HOs that Zu9 used to bring. Like he really liked trading off Eternatus early for like an Arceus or something, which would be easy for us to leverage by getting up T-spikes later, using Eternatus Terra Steel to trade onto like Koraidon or Zacian or NDM. But I mean, obviously you can change that Terra to like Fairy or Fire Dragon. Specs Lunala was an idea I ripped off of Frito and Kate during SCL, or before SCL actually. 44 defense, lives a 5-hit life orb scale on lead. This isn't a hugely relevant calc obviously, but like modest is nice, and not is nice just to have like some immediate damage on Ho-Oh, giving you the 2-shot on Fizz Def, and like you're still faster than modest, Kyogre, and Groudon, so it doesn't really matter. Specs Lunala just completely destroys a lot of balances naturally, especially those without Ting Lu. Even King Gambit structures can struggle into it, and it still acts as a nice pseudo Ogre lead check, since you trade incredibly favorably well into Kyogre. They don't 2-shot you, you 2-shot them. T-Wave isn't real progress. And we also had a pretty bulky leftovers E-Killer. Initially we were trying to do like some impish shit, but I think the damage is just too bad, especially with that Silk Scarf. You know, leftovers taunt is kind of both recover and taunt in one. It's kind of greeting a bit. 184 attack, and Adamant Nature guarantees the 1-shot on bulkless Koraidon after 2 Sword Stances. The bulk isn't like specifically for anything, but it does help a lot trading against other arcs, or like Zacian and Koraidon with Terra, both of which could be annoying since we don't have a Scarfer or Fairy Ho-Oh or fighting close combat Zacian. Taunt also shuts down a lot of cheese and stall in general. This includes like Iron Defense, Calm Mind, NDM, Skelligurge, Foul Play, Wisp, Arceus. This team was pretty cool though, if I say so myself. Huge fan of how Specs Lunala plays in general, and I think this was the only E-Killer team we created this tour that we actually loaded. It's hard to fit that guy sometimes outside of HO, but he did mesh nicely on this as like speed control. Specs Lunala just won this game handily though. You know, off lead, we get a powerful Moongeist into Arceus. Zoo9 is forced to either sack Arceus to break Shadow Shield or switch. Goes Ho-Oh, it gets 2-shot. Opts not to Terra. It dies. We kill Kyogre with it. We then do die to a Koraidon 4-hit skill shot. We almost got another one there. But like at this point in the game, Ho-Oh just wins the game. There's nothing for us to really do. All we have to do is get a burn on Arceus at some point, like this, and then we can just pivot around, and E-Killer shuts down any last minute cheese Iron Defense NDM bullshit that happens. But yeah, this was not much to say. It's just a pretty clear win off of our prep, off of our preview, and off of this lead sequence. To Scotty, right now I think we were in a pretty good spot. Scotty generally loaded either Cookie Cutter HO or passive balances with Water Arceus. The teams I were building for this week were just a bunch of different balance breakers that could have like passable HO matchup. That includes mons like SD Groudon, Band Ho-Oh, like boosting item Koraidon, Calm Mind 3A Arceus forms, and even Chi-Yu. Chi-Yu we kind of scrapped, but it does have good odds to 2-shot Water Arceus and Ho-Oh and Sun, so you have the ability to insta win a lot of BO matchups. It is kind of useless into HO, which sucks, but I think it has potential. We ended up on like a Hatterene Scarf Ho-Oh structure. The team you see on screen here actually had SD Groudon over Eternatus originally, but I think we found that Calm Mind Arceus and Kyogre became too unbearable for this, especially without like real long-term SPDF defensive tools. So ended up going this Eternatus set. In general, I am hesitant to load Scarf Ho-Oh Hatterene because it's super weak to Flame Charge Koraidon, and I think my Scout is pretty frail, so I would definitely pick it into myself. I thought Hatterene wasn't super crazy into us because of how much non-sludge E-turn we had loaded, and I like the utility of having this like Rocks Ghostius to get him up versus Hat. Also have good matchups into NDM and Koraidon, and otherization. It's just a very nice neutral defensive tool, as ghost types are in this tier. Generally, I would not load Substeel Koraidon into NDM users, but this team looked solid enough into most steals with Low Kick King Gambit and Wisp Ghostius, so I thought it was fine to fish a bit. Speaking of Low Kick King Gambit, I'm a huge fan of this set. As you can kind of see by my loads, I heavily value the ghost types in this tier, and because of that, I also heavily value King Gambit's presence, since it checks all the ghosts, helps cover up speed control, matches up really well into NDM, etc. Low Kick has pretty similar calcs into every single mon except for Arceus Fairy. You also get the obvious one-shot on King Gambit, which is huge. And it has good calcs into like Terra Dark setup, like ID Combat NDM, E-Killer that can get kind of annoying if you only have Kowtow, have to play like games against Recover. Dragon Tail Eternatus here is specifically to phase out Terra Poison Calm-Mind Arceus forms. I think they're a reasonable call into me because we loaded a lot of Toxic D-Max Etern so far, so Calm-Mind Poison Arcs are obviously already very common, but having no counterplay or no like Ho-Oh or big breaker like Life Orb Koraidon makes it kind of hard to play around them. So it was a reasonable pick here. I was also Shuka here to get like an immediate Toxic off versus Grounceus and Groudon, which looked really annoying for this team. And I definitely didn't want to take up Blades on Hatterene if I was trying to block hazards. So Terra Grass was like also there as like a secondary out in case they got out of hand. But most of the time you're gonna click Dark on King Gambit or like Steel on Koraidon or Fire on Ho-Oh anyways. Lum on Gambit is just here to catch like Wisp Arceus. It's not really needed, and Leftovers would be fine as well. But like with Ho-Oh, Wisp, Ghosty, and like Shuka Etern, Balloon didn't feel needed. And having Lum made us less Terra reliant versus Water Seas and Ho-Oh, especially since like this Koraidon really relies on clicking Terra Steel to win. So we did win this week early, and Fade subbed out, so I got a chance to get on the board. Scotty also subbed out, so I played Dugtrio's Broken. He's a Joe guy, he's a good player. He's not super experienced in Ubers. I still loaded up the same team because it's not worth it to change my prep up at this point. But he ended up loading the HO that Scotty used before. I believe it was an Ice Master HO, but on preview, you would think that Hatterene Scarf Ho-Oh farms these teams, especially Glim HO. However, my Hatterene has Dazzling Gleam over Psychic Noise. I cannot hit Glamora. Now this isn't like game ending or anything, but it is really annoying in that I can't actually have super clean lines versus Glamora. But yeah, so how this game starts out, it's a bit awkward since my hat can't touch Glim, but I was pretty sure that his Glim couldn't touch Hat either, especially with double Steel and a Lunala in the back, so it was whatever. So he opts to go to Lunala, breaking the Shadow Shield. My Lunala in on this team is either King Gambit or Eternatus. However, I think since Leftovers was not revealed, it's most likely not Psyshock, so I can just go straight into Eternatus. He also clicks Focus Blast immediately, which puts me in prime position to just get a Toxic off, utilize that strong Mix Bulk and Detail to just phase it out while keeping myself healthy. Some weird lines here, but eventually I get a nice Detail versus this NDM. Gets me some good momentum into this matchup. He's forced to switch back into NDM Relaxation, or even Glamora here on Toxic. And I end up getting a nice Flame Call into all of those. Now I go my Wisp Ghostius on Necrozma. I click Judge in case he Terras on Wisp, but the way he plays it, he is Lum. I do click Wisp after, which in hindsight might have been a misplay. I think I should have just clicked Judge over and over again. It was a little bit shaky. I wasn't like entirely sure if it was Terrifier or what. So I think Wisp is fine, especially since I have a Hatterene in the back to heal myself up. I also have Terra if I need to. I have Scarf Ho-Oh, so I think I have some leeway to do this. I do take a lot of damage though because of it. He sacks Lunala here, which is fine, I guess. I wouldn't have made that play, but overall, it ends up okay. I take some chip on Arceus. You know, I end up taking this position to get a Healing Wish off, get Ghostius back in prime position. Here, he goes Koraidon. I click Judgment as he Terrafires on my Wisp. This was a better play by me. If I clicked Wisp here, I'd have 0 progress and Charge's favorite to 2-shot anyways. So at this point, I'm in prime position to just win. He forces out my Arceus. Since Flare Blitz kills here, I sack my Eternatus, but it lives, unfortunately. I click Scale here. I end up winning a Sucker War and beating this Koraidon. A little bit awkward here, and I could have lost if I lost this Sucker War. Well, not could have, I definitely would have lost if I lost this Sucker War. But yeah, I win the Sucker War. Scarfo comes in versus Zacian. I get a kill. The game's pretty clean from there. There's no way for me to lose. I think lines I could have done better versus this Ghostius turn. I probably could have just stayed in with Ghostius, sacked it. If he's Flame Charge, he's not going to kill me. I would kill. If he's Flare, he can't scale off, right? He doesn't get the speed boost, so Ho comes in. Sun is up, so Terrifier or just normal Flame will just blow through all of this. I still have a King Gambit in the back, which I used to check his Arceus anyways. I still have a Terra Koraidon in the back that I would use to check his Arceus. Maybe it gets a bit dicey, but I think it would be a safer line in general to just sack Ghostius and go Ho-Oh, especially considering I don't even go back to Ghostius at any point during this game. But yeah, I think most of the time in this game my play was on point and better than my opponents. Our matchup was good, so I'm satisfied with this one. Officially starting the week playing Ubers, and Fade got jailed to NU Hell. I think the main idea I wanted to work with versus Kate was Life Orb Terrifier Koraidon to just nuke through Ho-Oh and any weird Terramons. Life Orb Koraidon also absolutely smoked her Pharisees usage. I didn't have like a super clear idea of prepping this week otherwise, but as I do, I mass built a bunch of different Life Orb Koraidon teams until one clicked. This was the first full hyper offense we used this tour, and it has a decent amount of unconventional sets. So like, obviously the Koraidon and Lunala are like super standard. You have SD Terrifier Life Orb, you Oko Ho-Oh regardless of Terra. If you click Terra, Fire, Flare at +2. Lunala has Emergency Terra Dark for other Lunala, considering I don't have Ghost Resist, and also helps against ID Calm Mind and DM. And, you know, like Rogue King Gambit, since my Zacian and NDM are not great into it. I also had Ice Fang on Zacian in case I loaded into Lando. It was quite annoying for this team since he could get rocks up early versus Zacian, and then throw off Lunala's defensive utility heavily, right? Because it would break Shadow Shield. It wasn't optimal for me to run Terra Steelization on the 6, since Terra Electric had better matchups into her teams, and I already had a Necrozma and a Lunala, so I wasn't in dire need of like Terra Steel defensively. And NDM is running Trick Room. However, I have a bunch of speed on it to still creep most defensive Ho-Ohs, so you can just click SD and one-shot them as they come in trying to whirlwind you out or sacred you and burn you before you get set up. So Terra Steel NDM also has some insane calcs, like you just one-shot Zacian from full with unboosted Terra Steel Sunsteel, you one-shot Lunala through Shadow Shield at +2, you even have good odds to one-shot Terra Steel Koraidon at +2. And Water CS as well is running like a slightly weird set. It's just offensive Calm Mind 3A. You usually don't see it on Water, you see it on like Phariseus, like Ghostius. but it's Judge Ice Beam, which has good matchups into like NDM and Zacian, just good neutral typing for everything. And Grass Knot is a nice lure to trade onto Kyogre and opposing Water CS. Obviously, we do have like Life Orb Koraidon and Electric Zacian, but it still can get kind of annoying. We also are Grass Knot over Thunder because it has slightly more damage. Also hits Water CS in Sun, which is huge. You also have nice cows into like Terra, Water, Groudon, but I think if you're already Terra, Water, and Groudon to beat your Calm Mind Water, you're probably in a not so great state. But going on to the game itself. So the first few turns of this game set me up incredibly nicely. Glamora died to E-Killer after taking like an EQ, but not until putting it into Zacian range after doing like Immortal Spin and Life Orb recoil. So Zacian can now revenge E-Killer. If I revenge E-Killer with Zacian, Kate only has a few options. A. Go Petra immediately to absorb the T-Spikes, then P-Shot into Koraidon and feign Scarf. Okay, go Ho-Oh, just live the raw wild or force me out to go into Water CS, and click Sacred. Pretty reasonable line. I think it could work. I think it's pretty safe. And you're not Terra reliant, not reliant on like feigning something. Or you can just go hard Koraidon now, pray for no fairy move, and try to trade. It is a reasonable set guess. I do have a Lunala, a Water CS, my own Koraidon, even like an NDM, so maybe you could guess no play rough. Not entirely sure, but it's not really a safe line, so her going Ho-Oh is entirely reasonable. So Ho is generally a big menace for this team, but I am heavily teched all over for it. This might be the decisive game on the decisive turn for this whole game, and I essentially win just off of killing Ho-Oh here. So generally on a team with E-Killer, Kyogre, Zacian, and Petra, I would guess you prefer like a Spadef Ho-Oh, but I also knew that Kate liked running a decent bit of speed on her Ho-Oh from other tours. Even if it was Fizdef, I think generally if it's 0 speed Fizdef, you would have 40% odds to kill, which is far too risky to just pop a Terra and go for game here. But from the context I have, with chances of being Spadef or with knowing that she runs some speed, I would say it's closer to 80 or 90% that I get a one-shot here, and I just end the game. So I just Terra my Zacian here, I get the one-shot, I trade favorably into Petra Runt, I click Blade on Recover, my Mountain is good, I have Lunala here, gets an entry into Zacian, I get a kill here, I get a kill onto Kyogre, I get a kill onto, or at least I heavily chip Koraidon. At this point there's no way for me to lose. I just click my free judgment. I don't kill Petra Runt here obviously because her sun is up and Petra is actually pretty bulky, but Foul Play cannot kill me, and I have Photon, Life Orb, Necrozma that's faster than Petra. So I just go hard Necrozma, click Photon, and clean this game up. I think I sequenced this game pretty perfectly, and I'm quite proud of it. But I also just think as an HO, this team is incredibly solid. I think most matchups are flexible, and things like Zacian set or like Lunala, Water CS, Terra are pretty easy to change up, even like 4th move on Glamora. But this 6 is just very consistent in my opinion. Versus I Love Mashing. Honestly, this might be the first time all tour that I built a team on day 1 and I just locked it in. I don't think this team is particularly insane, but I liked a lot of the sets on it that just blended together. I never really revealed some of this shit, but like I don't mind showing it now anyways. And I wanted to cover pretty much everything, as Mashing is a heavy prepper and can generally play most styles of teams. Generally, I'm a fan of Fairy CS structures because of how consistent they are into Koraidon and how easily you can build around them, but I wanted to mess around with super bulky Lunala and Ground CS, so I aimed for the goal of having a team with 6 mons that could just 1v1 Koraidon and win. Lunala was Wisp, which would come in clutch versus Zacian, Koraidon, some setup arcs like DD Ground, and it was Eevee to live 2 Zacian Blades and one-shot Koraidon with Psych Shock after a defense drop. Eternatus on this team was Citrus Fizdef to also eat 5-hit Scale Shot from Koraidon and one-shot back. Groundsius was Super Fizdef Terra Fairy, which wasn't as amazing into Koraidon as I thought, but it does soft check Zacian Koraidon a bit, which is nice, especially in conjunction with the Terra Fairy, which we didn't have a ton of on this team. Koraidon was just standard Scarf, although I had Terra Dark for like an emergency matchup of Lunala or NDM. Kyogre was offensive here, since the other mons were all bulked for Koraidon anyways, and I had like decent trading into Kyogre. I felt I could just get away with super offensive, pretty fast T-Wave Kyogre. I never revealed this set, but Zacian was Solar Blade. It's incredible tech into Groudon teams in my opinion. Pretty much insta wins the matchup a lot of the time by just one-shotting it. I think Zacian really only needs Behemoth Blade and Wild Charge in 99% of games. So like that last slot has a lot of flexibility. Though obviously CC is the most consistent, with like Terra Fighting or even like Terra Dark Crunch are the most consistent. But so looking back, this team is a little bit weird. It doesn't break particularly well, though Off Ogre does help, and it's not super defensively sound, but it's not like entirely awful by any means. Unfortunately though, despite my prep with Lunala and Eternatus made to beat Koraidon handily, I loaded into a Dialga, which I expected to anti-lead the standard Kyogre lead or like a standard Eternatus lead. I led my Groundsius to take it on, but I unfortunately load into Koraidon. I brought out the single mon that doesn't threaten a one-shot, or at least the risk of a one-shot on Koraidon on lead. Though I don't think Mashing's click was correct or safe, I end up misplaying gear. So I EQ for 44. Koraidon is not 2-shot, but it does get 2-shot if it clicks Flare Blitz or Scale Shot after. So there's chances of not having low kick at all, not risking clicking low kick into a hard Lunala, or even like a hard Scarf return. There's the risk of like staying versus just Flare and losing my Arceus health in exchange for Koraidon entirely. But generally I was thinking, okay, since Lunala isn't super useful in this matchup, I think I might be doomed to keep it. So I guess they would probably just kick Scale Shot here or like Flare to catch the switch. Unfortunately, they do not, and I lose my Arceus and I'm forced to sack Lunala here on a Scale Shot. In theory, I could have gone like hard Zacian and then pivoted back into something else, but I don't think the lines are preferred, and I think the risk of getting flared here is still pretty bad. But I'm forced to Terra my Ferocious here, or I just lose the game flat out since my mons are not that bulky. So I'm at a incredibly tough position here. I've traded virtually 3 mons and Terra for just lead Koraidon, and it seems like I can't win this. I do not win it, unfortunately, but I think I play extremely well here. I end up getting my Arceus ground healed back up. I pivot around this team. I even break Terrapago's shell over time, getting into position to win here. I get a couple turns wrong, but unfortunately at the end of this, Mashing was Calm Mind, Terra Poison, Arceus with Taunt. My Eternatus was not Detail, so I was just doomed versus this set. I could not do anything to it. I think if I positioned better, like the previous turns where I had this Dialga in, let's say I click Recover here instead of predicting her to go to Terrapagos, I think that would be a winning play. Or like I even click maybe DD and hope for a low roll. It's not like a crazy roll. But yeah, I think the line here is actually just click DD here. I guess I overthought that Tarappa was coming in, but at this point, since I don't have RCS set up in front of ground CS, or instead of Fairy CS, I have no way to win this, and game ends. This was our second loss this tour, my only loss this tour, and I'll blame it partly on my own play around some of these tools, but I think this team was just not structurally sound. I'm not a huge fan of ground CS in general now because of this. Not like just this game, but it makes building around Kyogre and Koraidon a little bit awkward, even if Calm Mind ground CS is an incredible win condition and DD ground CS is a very strong breaker on offense. I think my key takeaway is just to lead my citrusy turn, play it that way. I think having like this dedicated lead, or having this lead mapped out better, even into Dialga, would be fine. If I had led Eternatus and they led Dialga, I could just switch and then play around the same way. But yeah, unfortunate week. Didn't prep the best, didn't play the best, but we move on. Week 8, I was versus Ice Master. I think my key takeaway during prep here was that I wanted to cover the two types of teams that Ice Master mainly used: hyper offense and Groudon balance. This generally meant having good lines into Zacian and Necrozma versus like SD Groudon, Terapagos, and having a way to break Groudon and Ho-Oh balances. Midway through prepping, I was just looking at like offensive E-turn in general, but I thought about Specs E-turn and some of its specific calcs being potentially insane into these balances, and I was trying to build around it to cover the HO matchup. So I suppose you're wondering what Specs Eternatus does. The main things are one-shotting Groudon on lead, well, I guess not on lead, just anytime, with Draco Meteor, which Ice tended to lead in a lot of games. Two-shotting Fizdef Ho-Oh with Dynamax Cannon without Terra, one-shotting Max HP Kyogre with Terra Dragon Draco Meteor, and also just being able to force a recover on any bulky NDM that switched into Dynamax or Draco Meteor. So all of this, and like a nice speed tier in general to threaten Calm Mind Arceus forms, made Specs E-turn look pretty appealing to me, so I spent the week structuring around it. I figured that Specs E-turn blowing up Groudon, Ho-Oh, and Kyogre naturally paired well with my classic Kyogre Fairy Lando core, and I went Spout Kyogre in case of any stalls that I could have latched up into, especially with Terra Ghost. Calm Mind Taunt Fairyseus is a classic set. I was Terra Fire here to have more utility into the HO and Ho-Oh matchup, specifically versus Koraidon, Zacian, and NDM. Scarf Koraidon here is also like a standard catch-all HO mon. You throw this guy on a team and you expect him to like farm all 6 mons on HO. So the weird tech here, besides like Specs E-turn, is Balloon Kingambit with Terra Ghost. Obviously this intuitively makes some sense given Gambit had like a crippling fighting weakness and a ground weakness, but I specifically wanted this set plus low kick to hard wall Ice Master's E-Killers, which only ran Earthquake and normal moves. A lot of E-Killers run that nowadays, but in general I thought his E-Killer usage was pretty heavy, so it would help quite a bit. Gambit also covers a lot for this team by helping with the Lunala matchup, in conjunction with like Taunt, Calm Mind, Fairyseus, while also shutting down most NDMs due to their natural typing and Air Balloon. Going on to the game itself, I would say I loaded into a pretty good matchup. This is what I would have expected from Ice Master. You have like the double steal, an E-Killer, Lunala, Koraidon, and then Hazard Setter, either like an HO mon or like Groudon, etc. Generally, I would also say, since I use Lando so much, and I even use it here, I would warrant Terrastalization to be used. So you can see how here I lead turn into Caradon, I switch into Pharisius on Lunala or NDM, and at this point, since I'm Calm Mind Taunt, I play it a little bit uncleanly, not keeping my health preserved, not clicking Calm Mind immediately, instead of prioritizing breaking this Shadow Shield. So Zacian gets a free entry here, clicks SD, eliminates my Lando immediately. This looks like danger, but I am Scarf Caradon. This is also, I think, our first Scarf Caradon this game, or this tour. So I can immediately revenge Zacian. At this point, Scarf Caradon looks quite good in this team. Lunala's Shadow Shield is broken. I don't know what NDM set is, but there's no Terra, so minimal chip should set it up for KO. Arceus obviously, can eat Flare Blitz, and there's a Groudon, but I think this position is pretty prime. But E-Killer comes out, clicks SD, and since they've expended Terra already, I have some flexibility to use my own down. So I immediately pop Terra Ghost here, Terra Ghost, Balloon, and I Hard Wall Arceus. I Kowtow onto Groudon, get quite a bit of chip here, and King Gambit is in a pretty good position to just win the game. Ice's Groudons also can't hit most flying types with anything but Wisp, so later on in the game I can just boost up even if I'm burnt. So here I just pilot around it. I get Wisp on Kyogre entry. I luckily freeze Arceus, but this one doesn't matter too much since I do have a Ghost King Gambit. So they're forced to either double into Groudon here, into Caradon here, or just, I guess, stay in and trade for health. Kyogre isn't necessary for this game, but it is nice to have. He does choose to just go hard into Caradon here, gets a high roll, which is fine, rolls exist. So I can't kill Caradon flat out or hit a T-Wave off. Right here, we're both, I don't know what his set is here honestly, but since I'm Scarf and he's locked in, he has to switch out. I can click G-Clock here, it's a 2-hit KO on Arceus, it's a 2-hit KO potentially on Groudon. And so from this position onwards, I go Arceus, I taunt, Photon reveals that it's offensive NDM, likely Jolly, so Caradon does one-shot it with Flare Blitz. So the time is coming for Caradon to just win this game. Here I could flare, but it is awkward into a Caradon here. I may lose if he locks into, if I'm locked into flare and he starts setting up Scale Shot or something. But in the end, I still do have a Ghost Gambit at full health, so it's not unplayable. But here, I think I make a misplay. I don't Sludge the Lunala, I click D-Max instead. It does quite a hefty chunk. But since I click D-Max instead of Sludge, Ice can eventually stall it out, stay at 100, and Poison would have been really nice to break Shadow Shield to guarantee that even if it was bulky of some sort, Gambit could one-shot it. So yeah, we play this out. I get a kill. I don't know if it's bulked or not. If it wasn't bulked, then I guess it didn't matter. If it was bulked, I might have rolled it, not sure. But overall from this position, I just win. Not much I can do. They can't really touch King Gambit, and I can just boost up and kill. A very close game, but I think there were some unclean turns. I could have made more plays. Like turn 1, I think Ice Master has to respect Citrus Eternatus. Funnily enough, I made Citrus Eternatus, but I didn't respect it enough. I didn't think switching out would be that real of a play when you reveal these speed tiers. So I think, yeah, going Lunala or NDM is always the play from him. So D-Max here is just free. I think on the turn where Caradon declaws this Groudon, there's a chance I could also just go for the second declaw. Similar to Kate, I think Ice quite likes his speed creep, so there's a good chance that it took 31 and it wasn't like an unfavorable roll. There's a chance I could just get the kill here and then I win the game, but it's not certain, so not really an optimal line. So overall, I think my prep was good here. I love how this team plays. It has an appropriate amount of heat. I think I could even experiment with Shadow Ball Eternatus to hit Lunala and NDM harder, but not a big deal. I'm satisfied with this. 9, we were versus Entrocephal. By week 9, in SCL we had not used a single webs, and it wasn't in my own scout from UPL either. I thought that offensive Calm Mind arcs had great matchups into Entro in general, but it was hard to structure teams that were good into HO with just like Calm Mind 3A arcs because they lack bulk and they rely on some sort of speed control on the team to make up for their flaws. It took a few different builds and looking into his usage, but I think the 6 I came up with was pretty solid. Skill Swap B covers Hatterene, which was a reasonable pick into my Glamora and defensive Eternatus use, and Terapagos covered any anti-B setup on lead like Terra NDM, Zacian, Kieran Black, but also patching up the rare but still possible Tinglu and Groudon matchups. Gosius was the man of honor that this team was built around. Sub catches T-Wave from Kyogre and Arceus forms, while also letting you catch Gambit in a Soccer War, especially since Gambit teams just generally lose to Terra Ghost Gosius after it goes down. Speaking of Terra Ghost Gosius, it's not a super new innovation and it saw a lot of usage last year during SCL and Miraidon meta, but Entro really liked to bulk out his Koraidons from what I knew before, and so that made rocks with +1 judgment unlikely to get a one-shot. Terra Ghost, however, would pretty much guarantee that one-shot and would just let me get like a one-shot on pretty much anything on the field, bar like Gambit or Tinglu. Zacian was Terra Fight, Close Combat, and Trail, since I found some matchups versus Lunala and Scarf Lando to be awkward without a ground immune or a ground immune Terra, so Trailblaze kind of patches that matchup. Terra Fight was also pretty important for this team to power through Koraidon and help patch up like some annoying DD Air Balloon NDM matchups. His Ho-Oh usage was generally pretty low at this point too, or like Scarf, so I opted to ignore coverage for it on Zacian with Wild Charge Koraidon and a Kyogre instead. Kyogre was Mystic Water, which I did take from Punny and Team Italy in World Cup Finals tiebreak. I liked its calcs into Stall and other Kyogre offense, and I felt that Boots Koraidon could be dangerous versus this team, so having like the hard out with Fairy Ogre would just be very nice. So, on to the actual game. Webs was super fucking useless this game. I fished Toxic Spikes because I had like brought Eternatus or Glamora every single week, but Glamora was still super annoying. Because of it, I had to pop immediate Terra for Koraidon in screens. So went Kyogre and popped Terra Fairy to trade on it. I truly did not have much counterplay with screens with this team though, outside of like Roar and the sheer power of Koraidon and Kyogre. So a couple sequences that flip this matchup. Turn 12 is probably the deciding turn, so I go hard Koraidon on Grimm's parting shot. He goes Groundseus, obstacle click DD, I click SD knowing that I one-shot Groundseus at +1 and it was likely not super HP invested, but even if it was, I had good odds to kill. He makes the misplay here of Terraing Arceus, which I click Flare anyways just in case, but since I get that kill and he expends Terra, he only has Kieran Black left with no Terra, and at this point I think game is won. I have the flexibility to trade my Koraidon's health and pop Terra, since he really has 3 setup mons and 3 like suicide leads / like utility mons. So this Terra just ends the game, and Zacian and Terapagos will just always win. So I just set up, look at this powerful ass spout doing 73 to Kyurem. And then Kyurem can't win versus Zacian, and he forfeits. So I like the webs into his general scout, but I definitely did not get a great matchup here. I would not recommend using this one just into anyone, as it does feature T-spikes and some Ho-Oh structures. It's still playable, and it's still like a decent 6 with room to be modified, but like, I would say definitely change up the sets to whatever matchup you need. I think webs is not a good structure to use as a catch-all, but rather one to specifically tune to everyone's scout. Okay, so now we're at the last game I played. This was semifinals versus Frito. It was a rematch, though I guess not like quite, because Fade had played her last time. Frito is super knowledgeable in this tier and a huge prepper, so I wanted to cover all matchups if possible. The main things I did notice were a lack of NDM and Ho-Oh usage, which gave me some flexibility to bring one of my favorite Ubers, Deoxys Attack. Originally, I was testing a bunch of eject pack DOA structures, which let me click Psycho Boost versus like lead Kyogre, or like NDM Lunalization switching in, even Arceus, to get a bunch of momentum without having to play like the boring Kyogre lead mirrors. But I felt like I'd rather have the snowball capability of Sash DOA against a variety of lead Pokemon that were used, like Lunala, Kyogre, Eternatus, etc. Generally on lead, I don't think people stay in versus DOA unless they are A, Sash, B, Scarfers, or C, Lunala or NDM. So generally you can get a free plot off and snowball from that. I originally was Terra Stellar to get the guaranteed Oko on Zacian Z with Psycho Boost, but I found Terra Ghost to be more applicable, especially versus E-Killer teams. Terra Ghost lets Deoxys one-shot NDM at +2, while obviously blocking E-Speed revenge attempts. Generally against these teams that don't have any real speed bar E-Killer itself, Sash plot DOA just acts as a I will click better than you and win, because +2 DOA doesn't really have counterplay. You can like make plays versus their obvious switches to catch Psycho Boost drops, or force a Terra Dark and then gain momentum. Frito, like me, also was a huge fan of Ghosts. I didn't want to just load another King Gambit, and I couldn't figure out a viable 6 for Chen Pao other than Sash on some like HO style structure, which, funnily enough, ended up being what she loaded into me, which means we were this close to seeing a Chen Pao HO mirror in semis. But, returning back to my main points, I expected Ghosts, primarily Lunala, and I was trying to figure out counterplay that wasn't just loading a Dark, but I tried instead bulking out my Pokemon, just like Entro does. So my Koraidon is actually EV'd for +1 Terra Ghost Lunala, as these Kyogre Fairy Lando teams that I love without Gambit just lose to Lunala from like any unfavorable position. I was debating on sets, but I opted for double speed boost Taunt as I didn't think low kick was needed on this 6, and I think Taunt helped versus weird Terra, ID Combine, Fairy, and Ghost. NDM was fast stabs, Trick Room SD once again in order to cover the webs matchup and help with Groudon Ho-Oh structures similar to what she loaded into Fade in week 3. Kyogre was just max HP offensive, EV to 2-shot opposing max HP Ogre with some dump in Spadef, just to help pivot around Groundseize a little bit. Fairyseus was Wisp because I found myself having some annoying lines late game versus E-Killer and NDM, and having just Wisp and Judge on Fairy leaves you a bit vulnerable to Terrafire, Flame Charge, Koraidon, especially with a Scarf Lando as your Revenger. So I found myself running Roar to just force it out in case I ever got into that situation late game. Plus, you trade Kyogre versus HP very early on in a lot of these games anyways, so I didn't want to be too reliant on just having that back and forth between Kyogre and Fairyseus to check Koraidon. I also rarely click rocks on Scarf Lando anyways, and I expected her to bring some sort of Lunala, so I figured Crunch was optimal last. And yeah, so let me switch this viewpoint real quick. Okay, so I did load into DOS Chen Pao. DOA really only has 2 flat out matchups that it can't get an advantageous lead position in. I would say Deoxys Speed and Glamora. We loaded into Deoxys Speed, and since Stash is gonna basically be useless later in the game, and I don't think DOA has that much utility mid-game if hazards are up, I opted to just anti-lead it into their Deoxys Speed and limit the hazards they get up. So here, I click Shadow Ball, I get T-waved, I end up missing a Psycho Boost. That doesn't really matter, this chip is negligible. I go Lando, she stays in, Zacian goes down, which is huge for me. Defensively, I feel much safer into her team without it. Chen Pao's here, so now this is where it gets kind of questionable. I click EQ, predicting like a greedy no ice shard or like a SD, but on this turn I sack my Lando, and then I can go Pharisius safely. Here, if I don't get flinched, my Arceus can end up at full health and I can just chill. So I get the Wisp off, I don't get flinched, she clicks SD once more, she misses here, but this miss is negligible unless she like flinches twice. So I end up at full HP from this situation, though Pharisius never really comes in after this point, so it's not that deep. Here I just go Kyogre. We do the classic SV Ubers Kyogre trade. At this point I chip Kyogre heavily. I even get a Para, which is favorable, but it doesn't end up impacting this game, considering this Kyogre is not in cut-step range either. I click Scale Shot here, and now I am in game-winning position, potentially, depending on what the Pharisius set is. I click Terrifier Taunt here, in case it's Iron Defense, and it is. So at this point, right, just flat out, no questions asked, I should win this game. So I click Scale Shot into Arceus and make 0 progress. Misplay by me. I should have just clicked Flame Charge. That would have put me in a prime position to win this game. Or I could click SD instead and then just power through any Koraidon. Likely it's not Terra Steel anyways with a Chen Pao, Kyogre Fairy, and Zacian. But, you know, it's still better for me to not click anything but Scale here. So this, my first misplay. Clicking SD here is fine. I click Taunt here, which is also okay considering Pharisius can click ID here and be risky, so okay with taunting there. Now I click Scale, you know, whatever. That's a fine play. She could Terra into my Koraidon and that could be awkward, so I understand why I click Scale here and why she switches out. I click Flame Charge here on Iron Defense instead of taunting. This is just a flat out throw. With my HP invest, I should easily ensure that I live 2 judgments and at worst get off 70% on this Arceus. Might even be a kill. But yeah, I leave it at 20% instead, and it's not taunted, which puts me in an awkward position. Here, if she goes hard Koraidon on SD and clicks Terrifier, I just lose the game. I can't do anything with Arceus. I can't roar it out and win. So if she doesn't recover here and then judges as I read hard Koraidon with Photon, I lose the game. Koraidon still comes in, I have no Terra, it's over. So I click SD hoping that she either clicks Judgment and sacks Pharisius or clicks Recover. She does click Recover as I click SD. At this point I can click TR regardless of what she does. I can click SD again. There's no poison type on this team, so it has to be Terra Poison Arceus. So Sunsteel one-shots. This crit doesn't matter. And then Photon also one-shots, but I click Stuncio as it is a guaranteed OHKO in case of like a weird Terra like Dark. Obviously that's most likely not going to show up in this team comp, but it doesn't matter here. Got a little dicier than it should have because I did not play as clean of an endgame as I could have. That misplay is fully on me and I will learn from it. But I was a huge fan of this team I brought, despite the fact that all this prepping I did for DOA ended up being entirely useless. But yeah, overall, I was pretty happy with the teams I built this tour, the games they were used in, and my record and the Gibbles overall Uber's record. I really want to thank Fellyburn and Axel for giving me another shot at starting. I thought I was entirely doomed after getting some terrible records in previous SCLs, but you gave me another chance at like showing people that I actually really do know this tier quite well. This was by far my best official experience. The team environment was super fun to be in, and I'm for sure looking forward to potentially showing what I can do and improving my play in future Uber's tours. My teams will also be linked in a post I do for this afterwards, if anyone wants to just rock with them for future tours or use them on ladder. If you got through this whole thing, thanks for viewing and peace.